our children are leaning towards immorality, but it is us, the adults, that have the problem. But here we are in a new country and our kids are pushing our buttons. You need to understand the game to be able to beat the game. If you do not know the rules of the game you're playing, you will lose. Happy Saturday, everyone. It's an unusual video for me. You may not notice, but I'm actually sitting at my sewing table because I just got started on making my daughter's year 6 formal dress. She's graduating from primary school. She's going to be a high schooler very soon. So I decided to make her graduation dress, which is why I am sitting here and I have this around my neck. But I thought I would just quickly smash this video out because I don't know if I will find the time later today. So let me begin by reading this comment and then I'll tell you what exactly we are going to be discussing. Now, this is a comment that I got under my most recent video. I don't know if I'm going to be posting this in sequence, but for those of you who have seen my video talking about private versus public schools, that's the video I am referring to, and there's a link in the description. So I did say that that video was going to be the first of a series of videos talking about raising children across cultures, so parenting across cultures, but most importantly from the perspective of the welfare and well-being of your kids. Raising them in a culture that is significantly different to yours, especially if you're coming from a conservative background into a more liberal culture. And of course, I am talking about it from that perspective because that's my experience, right? Anyways, let me read this comment. Thank you so much for discussing this topic. It is one area I am a bit stressed about. I am leaning towards Catholic schools because I would want the children to complete their sacramental programs. And I also assume that Christian schools are a bit more strict about discipline and particular values. We, the parents, both attended Catholic boarding schools in our country. And even if we did not like it so much then, especially as teenagers, we have come to appreciate it as adults. By the way, I wonder what it is like for children coming from a strict environment, which is common for most African children, to a less strict one. How do they adjust to that? Otherwise, I am so grateful. So the two things I am taking out of this comment, which will form the basis of discussion in this video, will be discipline and adjusting. I hear African parents, yes, I am generalizing when I say African parents, but of course I mean African parents who are coming from a conservative background in terms of parenting, in terms of how they themselves have been raised. Okay, so if you're coming from that kind of culture and you're moving into a Western culture, of course, there are lots of things that you will find confronting. I imagine that when an African parent talks about discipline, there are certain expectations they have about what discipline is, and that will most likely be based on their own experiences. This commenter spoke about discipline in the context of Christian schools and how they believe that Christian schools would be a little stricter. I am not going to deny that that is actually true, that on some level, Christian schools go a little bit further than public schools when it comes to enforcing certain rules and regulations, okay? However, whether that extent of strictness actually meets our expectations as African parents of how strict we believe the school should be on our children is a different discussion altogether. What I have observed, because my kids have attended both public and private school, what I have observed is that stricter in that sense is applied on a very superficial level. So I am talking about things that have to do with dressing, the uniform policy, the dress code, certain hairstyles are not allowed. They don't want children in colored hair. When it comes to the uniform, there's a certain length that is prescribed, especially for female students who wear dresses to school. It's about those superficial things that you can actually see. Where I think that parents get a little mixed up is we tend to attribute moral uprightness just because someone dresses a particular way. Yes, there might be that stricter element when you look at those policies at a glance. It might look to you like they are stricter. However, what I have seen is that even in Christian schools, kids get bullied. Kids can be peer pressured into doing the wrong things. Both in Christian schools and in public schools, they would usually have different types of policies that address problematic behavior like bullying, bullying, like discrimination, racism. Yes, they would have policies around all of that. And when something comes to the school's attention, the measures to address those problematic behaviors are kind of the same across board. Most policies would take the same position, even if the language is a little bit different. Like you said, you want your kids to complete their sacramental program. So yes, there's always going to be that element which is attached to the core doctrines of that faith. If you attend a Catholic school, certain Catholic ceremonies and activities are compulsory. So sometimes my kids come back and they tell me, oh, tomorrow we are attending this mass and it is compulsory for every child in that school. But does that then translate into them becoming morally upright just as a result of being part of that doctrine? I don't think so. I feel doctrines are just doctrines. Okay, they are traditions. We would have our reasons for wanting to continue in the same traditions, but I do not believe that that is enough on its own. Nobody will come up to your child if they came to school in the wrong hairstyle and put a scissors in their hair to cut it off, like I experienced back in Nigeria, and that was a normalized experience. It wasn't anything unusual. I have a ruler here. Back then in school, teachers would use a ruler to rap on your knuckles like that very hard. Why? Because you did not trim your nails. Teachers will walk around with canes, and there was no hesitation to use those canes on you if you were misbehaving. And this misbehavior could be something as little as you were not standing in line during assembly. So when we think about strictness, I also want us to think as parents about the general culture within which a school is situated. You can't do more than that culture allows you. Here, it would be shocking to hear that a teacher actually raised their hand on a student. It would be shocking to hear that a teacher put a scissors in a student's hair and cut it off. If the behavior is too much for the school to handle, they call in the parents and they put that responsibility back on you as the parents. Go talk to your kid, or your child may face suspension or expulsion. Worst case scenario. It circles back to what I said in my previous video about you as the parents being held to a greater level of accountability for your kids' behaviors here than maybe back in Africa. Back in Africa, you know, as they say, it takes a village to raise a child, and anybody could be that village. Your neighbor on the street could see your child in certain situations and discipline your child on the spot, and that was allowed. But you can't do that here. Everything falls back on you. And the second thing was in relation to adjusting. Again, I'm going to say this and say it as a disclaimer. This is all my opinion, okay? Please feel free to disagree. I actually want to hear from people who have a different point of view from mine, but I want to assure you that I have come from the same kind of background you came from in relation to discipline, in relation to morals. Okay, so I understand that foundation. So the question in that comment was, how do kids coming from a stricter environment adjust to a less strict one? My answer to that question is, kids do not even think about how they are going to adjust. They just do. Kids are like sponges. Wherever you keep them, they absorb and they adapt very easily. It is us, the adults, that have the problem. Okay, so when parents ask this question, I feel like we should be redirecting that question. It should be, how do we as parents adjust to a less strict environment? And the confronting aspect of our children being in this new culture is that they will bring it home. And in bringing it home, it means you're going to be staring that culture in the face even more closely. You as an adult, you already have a blueprint of behavior that you follow. Your kids are still developing. Their brains are still developing. They're not yet set in their ways. They would go out there. They will assimilate into that culture. I had my child go to school one day. This would have been when they were like in year 3 or year 4. They went to school and came back and their nails were painted in a Catholic school. Painted. There was an activity in school. They polished their nails and then they came home. So it's not like, it was a compromise situation where someone was brainwashing them to paint their nails for the kind of reasons that we as parents would think that a girl child would be painting their nails, right? I'm not proud to say this. Their father and myself freaked out. But upon closer reflection, I had to ask myself why I was having such a strong reaction to kids painting their nails. I didn't have to ask too long before I arrived at the answer. We've come from a background where a lot of things are sexualized. normalized. And of course, when it comes to children, we don't want anything that might suggest that our children are leaning towards immorality, but more so immorality in a sexual sense. We don't want anything that will come close to our kids having that kind of attachment on their character. And that is why I said when it comes to adjusting, it is you, the parent, who will be so much more confronted by the things your kids will bring back home, which is also why I am saying you cannot afford to relinquish that responsibility of raising your kids to the school. You don't know what other conversations your child is having with the other kids there. I, as the parent, need to make sure that I am an integral part of her life from the beginning, that I am building that right foundation in a way that I am able to actually reach through to them when those pressures are happening and help her to navigate that stage of her life. If you're not careful, you will be building an environment of secrecy where they do not open up to you about anything. And when that starts to happen, that is the beginning of you losing them. I also see that the way a lot of us parents approach this issue is problematic in the sense that we tend to go the way of thinking good and bad, black and white, no middle ground. We need to find a middle ground. It shouldn't always be the case that we take a morally superior position when we think about the values that we have brought, and then we want to put the host culture in this sense is, the new culture that you're raising your kids in. We want to put that culture down to a morally inferior position. Once you've done that, you've created a battle for yourself. In my experience, there are very, very strong positives on both sides. There are so many things coming from my culture that I would not want to transfer onto my kids. There are so many things that I would want to leave behind and get rid of. But there are also so many things that I love about where I have come from. And I have also seen that there are some fantastic things I can pick from this culture which will perfectly complement what I am bringing with me. Why can't we have that? For a lot of us, these things have been handed down to us. We have never questioned it. We've just received these things as the truth, as final. These are not things to be questioned. But here we are in a new country and our kids are pushing our buttons. Am I saying you should just sit back and relax because, this is part of the acculturation process and you should just let your kids imbibe whatever it is they see outside? That is definitely not what I am saying here. In a nutshell, what I am saying is that you as the parent, you need to understand the game to be able to beat the game. If you do not know the rules of the game you're playing, you will lose. And that's why I said the responsibility starts with you. And you might find yourself beginning to disagree with some of the values that you have previously held. It's not a bad thing. What I would say here is that going into a new culture that is different from where you've come from is an opportunity for you to actually define what your values are. Define it so that you can defend it anywhere. This is just the start of a conversation that I am hoping I will be able to articulate well going forward. But yes, leave me your comments, your questions in the comment section. Don't forget to like this video before you go. I'll see you again soon.